Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best, and I mean the best, recordings of Rossini overtures. I have been dying to do this talk, but it took me a little while to organize it because I wanted it to be special, and I wanted to really get into the F word. Form. Form. I love form. And you're going to love it too. Because Rossini, as much as he wrote the most enchanting melodies in the world, the most exciting orchestral passages, was also a master of form. And I really think it's important to understand that because Rossini was a classical composer. Even though he lived till the 1860s, he was one of the last of the great classical composers. And he was not just in terms of time, because remember, he wrote his last opera still in the 1820s, William Tell. So these are all classical period works. No, he was as great as the great classical composers. He was as great as Haydn or Mozart or Beethoven or Schubert or those Viennese people who were sitting there. He really, really was. And one of the things those people all used very imaginatively was form. And so did Rossini. And he was a genius and an original and the founder of the modern Italian school because of his approach to form. Now, when Beethoven or Mozart write works using sonata form, the same forms over and over and over again, they're called geniuses. When Italian composers do it, they're called formulaic. And that really is so unfair and untrue. It is a fact that any composer who writes a lot of music to order, as composers really did until later in the 19th century when they found other ways to earn their support other than through composition, they have to use formulas. They have to employ forms. And even modern composers who write lots and lots of music, composers like Hindemith, composers like Martinu, they were also somewhat formulaic, but not in a bad sense. They had forms that they could use, and it was with the material that they put into them that was often so fascinating. And not just that, how their music deviates from the expectations, the formal expectations that it sets up in the listener. It's a whole different way of composing. I have no doubt whatsoever, that if Rossini had had 5 to 10 years to write a single opera and work on nothing else, like Wagner did, for example, he would have been 10 times the composer that Wagner was. And he would have anticipated everything that Wagner did because he would have had the time. And he didn't have to worry about success. And he didn't have to worry about money. I mean, Wagner always had to worry about money. But he was very, very good at snookering it out of people to keep himself supported throughout his life. Rossini made an actual living writing music. And of course, when composers do that, people point to the low bass taste of the populace, of popular taste. It was disgusting. And composers who appealed to that taste were pandering. It's all such crap. It's nonsense. The fact of the matter is great composers write great music, whether it's popular or not popular, and whether they use formulas to help them do it or not. So let's talk about Rossini overtures. Rossini overtures have a formula. At least the famous ones do. And that formula is really very simple. It's usually an introduction, followed by a sonata movement, a first subject, a second subject, usually no development section, but not always. And then, it's a recapitulation of the sonata thing. And the crescendo, the famous Rossini crescendo, the thing that had everyone in a frenzy, comes in at the end of the second subject. It's what they call the cadence, the concluding section of the exposition. And you get to hear it twice, because you get to hear it in the recapitulation. Sometimes you get to hear it more. Depends on the piece. Rossini's overtures are not formulaic. They are, or let's put it this way, they are typical theatrical overtures. If you look at Beethoven's overtures are typically in sonata form. They have an introduction. They have a first subject, a second subject. Most of them have no or a very limited development. or maybe some sort of replacement episode, but a brief development, then a recapitulation and a coda. And no one calls them formulaic. They're no more formulaic than Rossini's are. That's a fact. So are Mozart's. Mozart's do exactly the same thing that Rossini's did. That's what a theatrical overture was in that period. It was a single, independent, most of the time, movement in sonata form, usually without a development and with no repeats, because it was an overture. You wanted to get to the main event. So that's what these works are. And I'm going to give you an illustration of the form while also talking about what makes Rossini's overtures so special. And the one I have chosen comes from a marvelous, and I mean really good, series of the complete overtures. It's on Naxos. I mean, they've done so many wonderful things, and they've boxed up this series on 4 very reasonably priced CDs. It's with the Prague Sinfonia under Christian Benda, the famous musical Benda family, which goes all the way back to Rossini's own day. These are lovely performances, lively and full of vigor, and I've reviewed all of them on classicstoday.com, so you can read reviews of the individual volumes. But the point is that they are, I mean, it's an hour each, 4 or so hours. It's a good body of orchestral music. And there's all kinds of wonderful discoveries beyond just the most famous ones. The one we're going to talk about as our exemplar is La Scala di Seta, the silken ladder. Now, in addition to form, Rossini was obviously an orchestral genius. His use of instrumental color was extraordinary. And one of the reasons he was able to do it is because, although people don't like to admit it, Italian opera orchestras were fabulous at what they did. And Italian instrumental soloists really understood, as certain groups such as, the Fitzwilliam String Quartet, which I just reviewed in doing Schubert, do not understand, is that all of their instruments are voices. They all have character. They're supposed to be expressing vocal melody and feeling through that vocal melody. And Rossini was able to inhabit each instrument and make it just pop out with personality, and especially comic personality, which is what we hear in this particular overture. The Silken Ladder, La Scala di Seta. Oh, I love this piece. Adore it. So it begins with an introduction. Now, the piece is written for a small orchestra, a couple of flutes, a couple of oboes, a couple of bassoons, 2 horns and strings. That's basically it. And the overture is a long lyrical cantabile just for woodwinds. Nothing else, just the winds. And it's absolutely ravishing, gorgeously with every single timbre, beautiful. It's like with a little highlighter. You could just savor the combination of tones in them. It starts with a flourish in the strings, and then the tempo slows down, and we have the slow introduction. So I'm going to take the form of this overture apart, section by section, and then put it all back together. We're going to hear the whole thing, and then we'll talk about the recordings. So this may be a kind of a long talk, but I don't care because the music is so much fun. You could listen to it 100 times. It would never, ever sound less than fresh and spontaneous and funny. It's amazing. So here's the overture to La Scala di Seta. once the overture has done its thing, the first subject of the sonata form begins. And that first subject it's not really a melody. It's a flurry of notes. It's an extravaganza. It's a thing. It's a rapid passage of uninhibited jollity, first for the violins, and then an incredibly virtuoso solo for the oboe. And you got to be one hell of an oboe player to play this thing. And it tells us the kind of level of expertise that Rossini expected from his orchestras, even though they may have not been so great as orchestras, if you know what I mean. They had wonderful, wonderful individual solo players. These people were artists, and boy, could they play. So let's listen to the bubbly first subject. Bravo to the oboist. Now, as I've said many times, sonata music basically comes in two flavors. There are the tunes, which inhabit the key areas that the overture stakes out. And then there is the music that gets you from one place to another, from one theme to the next theme, or from one major section to the next major section. And that's called motion music. I call it that. I don't think anyone else does, but they should, because that's what it does. That's this purpose it serves. And usually the subjects, the main themes, of course, are sung out either by the violins or by individual wind soloists. But the motion music is for everybody. It just moves you. And Rossini's motion music has more motion in it than just about anybody else's. It's unbelievably vigorous. It's manic. It's so vigorous. And that's one of the things that makes these overtures so funny. You know, the tempest in a teapot, the sound and fury that he generates, getting from one tune to the next tune. So here then is the motion music. You see what I mean? Sometimes the motion music can anticipate the crescendo that's going to come at the end of the exposition. So it shares themes with that. That happens, for example, in La Gazza Ladra, the thieving magpie. There are all kinds of variants that Rossini rings on this idea in terms of, how he treats his thematic material and how big the overture is, which determines how it's going to be structured. So let's not say that because he used formulas, because he used form, that he was formulaic, because in the pejorative sense, it's absolutely untrue. Anyway, the second subject is hysterically funny. It is so obviously it's kind of like a trio. There's a theme and a response, then a theme, then a response. And the response is a giggle. It's very, very, very funny. And I that's all I can say about it. I can't explain to you why. You just have to hear it and imagine that these are people talking or singing or in some kind of mood or posture with each other. And I just think it makes me giggle. I don't know about you. So here is the second subject. I find that unforgettable. Oh, it's unbelievable. It's genius. Absolute genius. And he's just using simple primary colors, the timbre of two oboes. I mean, and how completely original it sounds. I just am in awe of his ability to do this. Then then comes the crescendo. Now, the crescendo in this particular overture is a series of barnyard noises. It's the only way that I can explain it. It's a riot in a hen house. I mean, that's what it is. And when you hear it, I'm sure you'll get the idea. So now here's the crescendo. The crescendo, it's basically like a 4 or 8 bar tune that gets progressively shorter as the orchestra gets louder. So it gets broken down to half of what it was, then half again, and then all hell breaks loose at the climax. It's so simple, but so ingenious. And people criticize Rossini, as I said, for being formulaic. But it's only because no one had ever done it before. No one. He did it. He invented it. Amazing. But he invented it in a way, I mean, you'd think it's been out there forever. But it wasn't. Here is the crescendo. Then, after the crescendo, one of two things can usually happen. Either there's a very, very slight little transition, and we go back to the exposition, which is actually the recapitulation, because everything is going to be in the same key all the way through, whereas before the first and second subjects were in their own complementary keys. Or, in this case, we get a real development section. It's not a long development section. Not at all. And it's entirely based on that wacky second subject, which becomes even funnier when you hear it try to become serious. And that's what happens here. And then eventually it will lead back to the recapitulation, which I include. I include the lead back in the beginning of the recapitulation, so you can hear how the transition happens. So here is the development and the start of the recapitulation. The rest of the piece proceeds normally with, all of its themes in place. And then the crescendo part flows seamlessly into a wild and wacky coda, a wrap-up that concludes the entire overture in a wonderful whirlwind of sound. And that's what a Rossini overture is, basically. But, of course, the devil is in the details. It's how he does it and what he does with it. I just think this is one of the most delicious of all the Rossini overtures. And now we're going to just listen to the whole thing, all 6 minutes and 30 seconds of it. And God, I love it. This is, again, the Prague Sinfonia under Christian Benda on Naxos as part of their 4-disc series of all the Rossini overtures. And it is a wonderful series. I can recommend it without reservation as an addition, particularly to some of the individual discs that we're going to talk about in a minute. So here it is, the complete, unified, without pause and no commercial interruptions, Overture 2, La Scala di Seta, the Silken Ladder. unbelievable. Just amazingly unbelievable music, perennially fresh, and I just never get tired of these pieces. Of course, apparently the rest of the world doesn't either, because we still listen to them very frequently. They're gorgeous. So let's talk about some recordings now. I think I have 10 of them here, and they're so wonderful. Okay, first historical Toscanini. You got to have Toscanini do Rossini overtures. Rossini overtures were made for people who were fanatically precise, because Rossini was fanatically precise. That's the kind of guy he was. I'm sure he had obsessive compulsive disorder. That's why he burnt out at such a young age and stopped composing operas when he was only about, well, how old was he? 1892. He was in his 30s. At 1929 plus 8 or so, he was about 36, 37, about the age Mozart died, when he gave up writing operas. And who could blame him? He was making himself crazy. And then, of course, he had a whole new career as a composer for piano and chamber music and the Petite Messe and all this other Stabat Mater, all this other wonderful stuff after his operatic career had ended. But Toscanini was, amazing. In Rossini overtures, these have variable sonics. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them, including, you get William Tell, Semiramide, The Siege of Corinth, La Gazza Ladra, Cenerentola, Cinderella, that one, The Barber of Seville, Il Signor Bruschino. That's the one where you tap your bow against the music stand. And The Italian Woman in Algiers. It's a wonderful selection of all the most popular ones. So it's worth hearing for the historically minded. The rest of these are not historical, but they should be or could be. There's this wonderful 2-disc series with Riccardo Chailly in the National Philharmonic on Decca. This is a very, very good set for people who want like an extended series with some familiar and less familiar ones. The only catch, I would say, is that the National Philharmonic, it was a pickup orchestra. It was a recording orchestra, and they just don't have the personality that, some of the other great orchestras do. Chailly conducts the music splendidly, but I can imagine people wanting a little bit more personality in the playing. It's a little bit stolid, maybe the word is. But, this is a very nice collection. You can't go wrong with it. So, I'm not going to complain too much. Next, who do we have? Carlo Maria Giulini. Oh, Giulini, though, these are wonderful. He was, everything he did with amore, with love. There's not a lot of room for, spirituality in Rossini's overtures. Thank God. And so, Giulini wasn't going to do that. This is just wonderfully songful, lyrical conducting, beautiful playing, and it's excellent. And you get, 9 of them, 77 minutes of Rossini overtures, all with the Philharmonia. It's a beautiful, beautiful disc. And you can look at the contents if you order one of these and decide, if they have everything in it you want. You get all the famous ones here, too. So that's okay. Next, there is sort of a short disc because it's a collection of stuff. This is Claudio Abbado with the London Symphony on RCA. This has Semiramide, the La Scala di Seta, which we just heard, Il Turco in Italia, the Turk in Italy, the Barber of Seville, Tancredi, oh, that's a major masterpiece, and William Tell. But you also get 3 Verdi bits. You get the disused Aida overture, which Verdi wrote and then correctly threw away because it's positively dreadful. And then the overture to I Vespri Siciliani, which is wonderful, and La Forza del Destino. So these are all very good. These are wonderful performances. Abbado is great in this music, but more on that anon. Then we have sort of a big set. We have a 3-disc set with Neville Marriner and the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, doing the complete Rossini overtures, which they aren't quite, because, some of them were reused and some of them were revised, and there may be a work or two that he didn't pick up here, but it's pretty damn good. It's awfully close. You get, let's see here, 10 plus 8 plus 8. Well, you can add that up. What's that, 26? 26 overtures. I mean, Rossini wrote 39 operas. So you can see that some of them will appear more than once. Anyway, this is also it's Mariner. What am I going to say? It's very well done. It's very musical. It is definitely a little bit lacking in fire and color and chutzpah. Let's say, not irredeemable chutzpah, the good kind of chutzpah. It needs to be a little bit more in your face. It's too polite, but they're good. They're really good, and you get a lot of them. And there are only three complete Rossini Overture collections. There's this one, there's a Decca one that I haven't heard yet, but I'm getting it so that I can hear it, which is also on 4 discs. And then there's the Naxos series, which I think is better than this, frankly. Really, clearly superior to Mariner. But I have to mention it also because it may be easier to find. And, you should hear these works, and you should hear them in multiple versions, so I don't feel too guilty. However, I am down to 3 here that are my absolute favorites. So for a complete set, go with Naxos. No question about it. And if you liked what you heard here, just get it, and don't worry about it. You do get, by the way, in this volume 2, before I get to the top 3, some Eduardo and Cristina, which is unusual and also one of the big ones. It's 9 minutes long. And Sigismondo, which is also a big overture, 8 and a bit minutes. They're serious works, and they are large-scale movements. So that's just pointing that out. Okay, my top 3. Here we have Reiner in Chicago. Reiner was another one of those, obsessive-compulsive precision guys. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, is this a wonderful disc for that. The Chicago Symphony plays amazingly. This has one of the most fabulous Thieving Magpie overtures you've ever heard. It's incredible. And you also get the Barber of Seville, Cenerentola, Il Signor Bruschino, La Scala di Seta, which we just heard, and William Tell. So it's not as well filled because it's an earlier, late 50s, early 60s recording. You get 6 overtures. So that means you'll probably want to have more of them than just this disc, but this disc is hot, hot, hot. Then we have Orpheus without a conductor. These are beautiful, beautiful performances. They do not do the biggest ones. They do the ones that are really written for more chamber-like forces. So you get Tancredi, the Italian woman in Algiers, Lignano Felice. Haven't heard that one in a while, have you? La Scala di Seta, the Barber of Seville, Il Signor Bruschino, La Cambiale di Matrimonio. Haven't heard that one either. And Il Turco in Italia. Fabulous playing, absolutely miraculous playing, the kind of hair trigger precision and finesse that this music absolutely demands. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. However, my favorite of all the Rossini Overture collections is, you're going to surprise maybe, Abato again. This time with the Chamber Orchestra of Europe. Now, one of the things that's made some of these new overture collections so wonderful, and I have to give them credit, is the scholarly tradition now of having critical editions of these overtures and returning to the original orchestration. I'm not saying you need to do them on period performances, period instruments, that sort of thing. That we don't need. But to hear these pieces with the original scoring, with chamber music-like forces, is a whole new experience. It's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And Abato was made to do this music. He was the greatest Rossini conductor of the second half of the 20th century, maybe the entire 20th century. He has a precision and a grace and a love for this music, its elegance, its dazzle, it really is just a perfect affinity between conductor and music, I think. And this particular disc has 7 overtures. You get the Barber of Seville, Semiramide, the Italian woman in Algiers, William Tell, La Cenerentola, La Scala di Seta, and La Gazza Ladra, the Thieving Magpie. A wonderful mixture of the larger and smaller scaled overtures. The recording is fabulous. The playing is fabulous. It's all just fabulous. Marvelous. So that, my friends, is the disquisition on the Rossini overtures. I just hope you will listen to them with a little bit of a fresh ear, maybe, having heard the initial lecture and that you'll just go and have a good time listening to them now. You don't have to, make a fetish about form. You really don't. I mean, Rossini did so that we don't have to. We just enjoy the unfolding of the music. But I always do think it helps a little bit if you know what's going on and if you know what the sequence of events is supposed to be so that you can appreciate afresh Rossini's incredible genius in playing with our expectations and doing the unexpected, which he does more often than not, because that's what geniuses do. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.